Welcome back to another episode of Sorry for Rambling. As always, I'm Alex Cack, and I am joined today by Spike Cohen, the 2020 Libertarian nominee for Vice President of the United States. Spike, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Alex. And I like that your show is called Sorry for Rambling, because that is what I do. So it is also an apology in advance for what's about to happen. So
I like to think that it sets the show up for what I want it to be, which is
rambling.
an embarrassing dialogue that no one should want to listen to.
That no one should like. Well, I hope to do that. I hope for it to be well, if it's embarrassing, I guess that's entertaining too. But I hope it's not something no one would want to see, even if it ends up being embarrassing to me.
Someone's gonna watch it. That's the amazing part. It's guaranteed that at least a few hundred people will listen to it, watch it. Right. Some of these have done like 6,000-7,000 streams, and I'm just like, which I shouldn't be saying this right now, but I'm.
Why do you like my show? That's the new title. Is why do you like this?
Why are you watching this? Don't you have a job? Don't you have lives? I don't at the moment. That's why I'm doing this. Right. Let's dig into it though, because I think you had a very unique and interesting kind of path into the position that you're in now. Mm-hmm. You've been an activist in libertarian politics for some time, mm-hmm. but you were the running mate for Vermin Supreme.
Yep.
And now if you're listening and you're unfamiliar, Vermin Supreme is a perennial candidate. He runs for president. He's ran for some other things, but pretty consistently. He does so while wearing a boot on his head.
Boot on his head.
Yeah, he runs on a platform of inventing time travel to go back and kill Hitler.
Yeah, baby Hitler.
Baby Hitler.
Before he does anything bad, we want pre-Holocaust Hitler.
Yeah, you get right to the source of it. Free ponies, mandatory toothbrushing and dental hygiene. And you were his running mate, and now you are actually going to be on 50 ballots, probably.
We're already on. I think we just hit 41 plus DC. So, yeah, I mean, if past performance is a future indicator, we should be on all 50 state ballots.
How does it feel?
It feels fantastic. It is everything I wanted it to be. And I'm not avoiding your question about the vermin thing, but it feels great. It is what I wanted to do. The reason I got into this is that I wanted to reach Americans of all across the divide of different ethnicities, demographics, income levels, ages, and everything else across the whole country, and share an unvarnished message of liberty, and share what is the Jorgensen-Cohen platform, which is taking the power out of the hands of the craven, pandering Republican and Democrat politicians and the cronies, the well-heeled, politically connected billionaire cronies who have bought and paid for them to be in office. And to take that power and that money that they've taken from you and that freedom that they've taken from you and that decision-making ability they've taken from you, and remove all of those barriers and burdens and put that power back in your hands where it always belonged. And so with Vermin Supreme, Vermin has discovered an incredible way to use satire to reach people who, something like, depending on who you ask, anywhere from 35 to 45% of the country that is eligible to vote, does not vote, does not participate in politics, wants nothing to do with political anything. These are the people that if there's a political discussion, they get up and they walk away from the table. They don't want to talk about it. They are disgusted with the entire thing. They are disgusted with politicians and with the media and everything else. And they recognize that the system was not designed for them. It was designed against them. It was designed by incredibly powerful and cynical people to rob all of us of our money, of our time, of our wealth, of our resources, of our power, of our freedom and everything else, to the benefit of incredibly powerful people and at our expense. And so they don't want to participate. And they don't want to hear from a politician. But if someone can reach them with a satirical and good-hearted and good-natured way of making fun of the system, basically, you can get their attention. They enjoy it. Their cognitive defenses are down because they don't feel challenged or pandered to. And then eventually they want to hear more about what the actual message is. And that's when you can hit them with the libertarian message. So Joe and I are very appreciative of everything that Vermin has done to bring people to libertarianism and to bring people to the party and to help this campaign as well. And that is what I was doing, in that time of running with Vermin, demonstrating that we can use a humorous way. I was always the more serious one of the two of us, but we can use humor. We can be good natured. We can make fun of the fact that the system is a cynical joke, and we can actually turn around and make it so that the punchline, instead of being us constantly being victimized, the punchline could be that we're on to their joke of a system, and we can turn it around on them and we take the power back from them. And that's what Joe and I are running on, is giving Americans their power back.
Have you had to pivot your tone, you feel, at all since becoming the nominee?
Oh, of course, and I that was always the plan. Even if Vermin had been, Vermin and I always agreed on two things. One is that if one of us got the nomination and the other one didn't, whichever one of us did not would enthusiastically support the ticket, which is what Vermin has done, and we greatly appreciate it. The other thing was that, especially for me, there would be that pivot. There would be that pivot towards the more serious. And again, I was always, we said that Vermin was the 80% funny, 20% serious candidate, and I was more of the 80% serious, 20% funny candidate, and we sort of dovetailed well that way. And even still, we interact with each other on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that, and it plays off the way, sort of that the Abbott and Costello type of deal. But the thing is, there had to be that pivot, right? Like, we're talking about serious things. We're talking about a pandemic. We're talking about, these protests as a result of decades of police brutality. We're talking about the war on drugs. We're talking about ending the wars, bringing troops home. We're talking about all these problems, massive student loan debt, the rising cost of healthcare, veterans issues. We're talking about very serious things. And yes, you can use humor to reach people, but you can't always, or at least I never plan to always be joking in the way that I presented it, no matter who my running mate was. So obviously, paired with anyone, and especially paired with Joe, that was always the goal. And I always have campaigned seriously. So even when I was running as Vermin's prospective running mate, I talked about serious issues, and I did so in a serious manner, but with a hat tip to the reality that we can use meme culture and viral humor and things like that to reach people and to bring them in, and then they see what the serious message is.
The whole Libertarian primary I thought was fairly interesting. Vermin actually won some early contests in it, which I think shocked people, because there were what you might consider to be more serious politicians in the race. I mean, Lincoln Chafee was running in the Libertarian primary, and he got little to no traction.
That was because of policy. So Lincoln Chafee, and he's still a member of the party, and we're glad he's a member, and we were glad that he ran. His policies were not what we felt reflected our platform. Our platform is a libertarian platform. It is not a moderate Republican or moderate Democrat or some centrist in between that, or a little bit less government than Republicans, type of platform. It is a strictly libertarian platform. It is a belief that things are best managed as decentralized as possible, taking the power out of the hands of the powerful and putting it back in our hands, because it was taken from us. Our rights and our ability to make decisions and our ability to thrive and our power and our wealth has been taken from us. They didn't get this as a result of some natural occurrence. They took it from us slowly and in an insidious and cynical way. Over time, over the decades, over the centuries, really, they have taken that power from us. And we believe that the harmful and abusive and inequitable outcomes that we have come to know and love from the Republicans and Democrats are a direct result of their policies and their determination that they can simply take from us at any time that they see fit, and do with it what they will. And it has led to the outcomes that we have come to know from them. And we believe as libertarians that we will take that power back, and that we will give it back to the people where it belongs, and allow us to live better lives. And so, Lincoln and some others, their policies weren't necessarily bad ones. They just didn't reflect what we believed needed to be the direction for the country. And so, that's what happened there. The reason that Joe won was because she demonstrated that she was able to present a very principled interpretation of our platform in a way that spoke to everyday Americans and spoke about not the philosophy or the ethos behind it, which is important, but to everyday Americans, they want to know, how does this benefit me? How does this make things better for me and my family and my loved ones and my community? And she demonstrated a really succinct ability to be able to do just that, to demonstrate the benefits of libertarian policies. Now, our common sense solutions are the way to fix the problems that the Republicrats have created.
I'm curious, because you were talking about the libertarian kind of platform and the party not simply just being moderate Republicans. It seems to me that the last 20 years of inter-party politics in the Libertarian Party, I mean, even longer, really, has been kind of interesting. And I wanted to touch on some of that and hear some of your thoughts on that. I mean, because if you go back, I mean, to 2008, you guys nominated Bob Barr, who, I mean, he maybe sounded a little more libertarian-esque once he was running in your guys' primary, but he was a pretty right-wing, conservative Republican congressman.
As was his running mate, Wayne Allen Root. Yes.
It was literally the next name I wrote down here because Wayne Allen Root stayed involved in libertarian politics for a while. And I would say that he was socially further to the right than Barr was. I mean, Wayne Allen Root is a hard right-winger kind of Christian conservative. Is there room in your party for people like this, people whose views on social issues are not liberty-based at all?
Well, there's room for people who are socially conservative for themselves, who want to, something my friend Larry Sharp likes to say a lot, and he's a superstar within the party. You can be as liberal or progressive or conservative personally in how you live your life as you want and still be a libertarian. The key difference is that you cannot impose your ideas of how people should live on others, because now you're aggressing against them. Now you're saying, I don't like how you live. It doesn't really affect me. It doesn't take from my life or my rights or my property, but I don't like it. And so I'm going to use the government to basically tell you how you have to live, or that you have to modify things to be in a way that I like, even though, again, your lifestyle doesn't affect me. And so that's where the problem is. The problem is not where you fall on the spectrum of your personal preference for how you want to live, and how you want to, how the type of people that you would like to prefer to interact with in terms of how they live. That's perfectly fine. That's people choosing to interact or not interact as they see fit and to live their lives as they see fit. It's when you add that coercion of trying to make others do it. And that is the difference between libertarians and authoritarians, whether on the right or the left. So does the idea that someone doesn't support, certain more progressive social things, do they fit? Sure. Is it, but if we're asking the question of, does someone who, believes that government should stop those things from happening or stop people from living in a way that we don't like or approve of for whatever reason, religious reasons, ethical reasons, whatever, but that isn't actually harming anyone, we just don't like them living that way, then, I mean, they have a right to that opinion, but we certainly don't want to nominate them to anything.
Well, and that's specifically my question. Yeah. Is because, I mean, to me, listening to them back then and in the years that followed, they seemed to be advocating, maybe not as aggressively as what you saw in like the Constitution Party or even some parts of the Republican Party, but they were advocating governmental, federally, from the top, so to speak, federal policy that would dictate certain bases of how people live their lives, right? Especially when you're talking about things like gay rights, etc. There's a lot of morality politics at play, which often was in direct conflict with our platform, which is very that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, completely against our platform. Yes, absolutely.
And I mean, immigration with those two specifically, but with other people as well, seems to be a real sticking point between where the platform has been for several decades now, compared to what we see with some libertarian voters and some people running for office as libertarians. How do you kind of rectify that? And how do you see that making up the state of the Libertarian Party today?
So we don't expect, and obviously there are degrees to things, right? So there's someone who looks at our platform and goes, yeah, I'm not a big fan of that, but most of this looks okay, or all but this one thing looks okay. Or some people that go, this and this and this, I could do without, but overall I like this platform. And then there's some people who look at it and go, yeah, I disagree with most of this. Well, if you fall into that latter, in terms of running for office as a libertarian, maybe that's not for you. If you have one or a few things that you disagree with, but largely you agree with it, then yes, this is room for you. Now, I will say this. the top of the ticket, president, vice president, and even then, like Senate, I think the higher up the ballot you are running for, the more important it is that you actually support as much of all or most of our platform as possible, and B, demonstrate that you are able to articulate it in a way that connects with everyday Americans. I think that that's important. Someone running for city council who doesn't like our immigration platform, or they're running for state senate, and they maybe aren't a fan of ending the entire war on drugs, maybe just legalizing marijuana or something. I mean, again, I would be in disagreement with them, but I don't think that necessarily is a reason to disqualify them from running. And it certainly isn't a reason to disqualify them from joining the party or voting Libertarian or identifying as Libertarian, even if, again, on that issue, they may not agree with Libertarian. And we see that with conservatives, progressives, everything else. We're not monoliths, right? Like we'll have, a spectrum of opinions. I'm a pretty solid down the line, strict libertarian, but I also, as a libertarian, recognize that people are going to come at things from all different points of reference and opinions and so forth. And if we are to grow as a party, it is going to mean that at least temporarily, we're going to be bringing in lots of people who are, as we like to call it, baby libertarians, people that are new to libertarianism. They may not like our position on healthcare starting off, or they may not like our position on immigration starting off, or gun control or whatever else. But we want to welcome them in, because if we shoo them away, if we say, no, you're not libertarian enough, then we've all but ensured that they're never going to come around to our way. If instead we bring them in, or even better, meet them where they are and agree with their concerns, validate their concerns, and then demonstrate how libertarianism works and how it's actually a solution to those problems, then we can actually affect that conversation of taking them on that journey to becoming libertarian. But we can't do that if we completely shut it off. Going back to the question of people actually running for office, obviously the bar is a little bit higher, and the higher up the ballot you are, the higher the bar is, which is why I think, you look at some of the previous candidates and then especially how they turned out afterwards. And, I think part of the reason that the libertarian delegates chose Joe and me is because we've demonstrated that we are both philosophically principled libertarians and able to demonstrate and articulate why libertarianism works and contrast it with the bad policies of the Republicrats to the public writ large, not just to libertarians and people in libertarian adjacent circles, but to the entire general public.
I want to kind of drill down on some of this a little bit, because I've been fascinated by the Libertarian Party's kind of evolution for some time, because in the last 20 years, it seems like it's been through a series of kind of inter-party culture wars that I find are fascinating to watch. I'm a member of all these forums and groups, almost just to be an observer to some of them online.
Right.
There was, 10, 16 years ago, this real kind of push that was this kind of thought process that maybe this kind of strictly anarchist, capitalist, kind of minarchist view that had kind of dominated the party for some time,
right,
was not attracting voters. I think the first shift of that almost seemed to be to push toward this more kind of paleo-conservative thing that we saw with Barr and Root.
Mm-hmm.
But then we saw the other side of it, which was, well, let's just be kind of moderate libertarians, or at least that's what we wound up finding at the top of the ticket with someone like Gary Johnson,
right, Bill Weld and so forth.
Who are people that more or less, I think, were in the spirit of the party. Most of their views were somewhere based on these platform planks, but they maybe just took more moderate or gradual approaches to them, or maybe they had a handful of dissenting opinions. I think the big one with Johnson was food labeling. He was very pro food labeling. He thought that should be expanded and it should be stricter from the FDA. And food products.
Yeah, Gary was a lot more in line with the platform than, for example, Bill Weld was. There were actually quite a few things that Bill was not. We nominated Bill because Gary asked us to, and then we saw what happened as a result of that. Bill repaid us back by vouching for Hillary and all but endorsing her, and then leaving the party shortly after. So I think what happened 10, 15 years ago, I think when we look back and look at things like the Dallas Accords and like the things that came out of that, I think we were, and this is me, this is not an opinion of the Jorgensen campaign or anything like that. This is this isn't even me speaking on behalf of my personal campaign team or anything else. This is my personal opinion on this subject. I believe that when you look at what has happened in the past, the battles between the minarchists and the anarchists, the battles between the left and the right, the battles between people who want the abortion plank removed from the platform and those who want to keep it on, and all these different battles, I think the biggest battle, if you distill them down into one battle, I think it was largely a false binary choice that we were given, that we either had to be principled brutalist libertarians. So we had to say libertarianism in this sort of facts don't care about your feelings type of way that doesn't really connect with most people. So you'll say, for example, when we talk about, abolishing the Department of Education, instead of presenting how the Department of Education has utterly failed the American people and made education worse and made it incredibly expensive with worse outcomes, and how actually giving the power back to the American people and allowing them at a community and state level to be able to come up with better solutions that actually match what their children need, as opposed to just these endless standardized tests and every bad thing that happens there. Instead of presenting it that way, that we have to present it as the government I shouldn't be having to pay for your schooling, and people who are have their children in government schools are welfare queens. That was one side of the false binary. And then the other side was, well, we shouldn't even talk about it. Or we should say that we just want to reform the current system because, people don't want to hear about how, education system has failed. They're not ready for it. We need to present sort of a compromise step as our platform. And of course, the reason that doesn't work is because A, you're not presenting a bold enough difference between the other two parties to make it worth voting for you if the likelihood is that those two parties would win. And B, if anyone reads our platform, they'll start to think that we're trying to pull the wool over their eyes, because that's not what our platform doesn't say reform the federal education system. And so I thought it was a false binary there. And what we've said is, no, it's neither one of those. We should be principled libertarians who empathize with people and who meet them where they are. What a novel idea. Reaching people where they are instead of expecting them to take all of this journey to your new idea that they know nothing about and sounds kind of weird because it doesn't line up with anything anyone else is saying. Meet them where they are. Listen to their concerns and actually connect with them, and not just obviously connect on a one-on-one level, but even how I'm doing it, connect on a coalition level. Meet people where they are in their spaces, from their precepts, using their nomenclature, and saying, yes, your concerns are absolutely valid, and here are the problems we're facing. Reflecting back that you actually know what they're talking about, what their concerns are, and what the problems are, and then taking them on the journey for how we got here, how these problems were created, and how our solutions will actually fix these problems at the root cause of what caused them, and how it will actually make it so that they're better and we don't have to worry about these problems anymore, or so that these problems won't be as bad as they have been. And that is the way forward. And I'm, it has been growing pains within the party, but I have seen libertarians more excited in this cycle than I've ever seen before. And I've talked to libertarians who have been members since it was formed. When it was first formed, in 1971, that are saying that this is the most excitement they've ever seen because we're all on board with the idea. Pragmatists, radicals, the Mises Caucus and the Audacious Caucus and all these different groups and factions within the party are all united behind the idea of presenting a very principled, unvarnished, unapologetic, empathetic, engaging, and dynamic way of presenting our platform to a public that sorely needs these ideas.
One last point I want to touch on the kind of evolving culture within the Libertarian Party itself, which is something that's been around for a little bit but didn't seem to gain any steam until recently, which is the Libertarian Socialist Caucus.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on them? What is their place in the Libertarian Party? I mean, obviously, we know Mike Gravel ran in 2008. And I think that to some extent, he's almost kind of the standard bearer of that kind of.
His ideas are best described as libertarian socialism. There are some things that aren't necessarily libertarian or necessarily socialist, but he's kind of within that. If you look at the 4-quadrant system, he's definitely in that bottom left quadrant. I guess first within the Libertarian Party and then libertarian. Well, no, actually, let's start with the history of libertarianism. actually as a term, a coined term, started with Pierre Joseph Proudhon and other socialists who were describing a system of voluntary socialism, of actually, again, taking the power from the wealthy. And at that time, they were fighting imperialists. They were fighting, like monarchists, and then later they were fighting fascists. But basically, what they were saying was, let's decentralize things, and we believe that when we decentralize things, that when we take the power back, when we remove the coercive entities and have just basically, if not an anarchist society, at least a minarchist society with a very minimal governing body, that people will naturally want to collectivize. They will not want to, be in this proprietarian system that is being imposed upon us. That's their belief. And that's essentially what libertarian socialists believe. That was actually the roots of libertarianism. Now, I say this as a devoted capitalist. I am an anarcho-capitalist. And I believe that if people, I also believe that we need to take the power back and give the power back to the people and allow things to decentralize, and for people to come up with solutions that best fit themselves and their loved ones and their communities based on a market and a people set free to work with each other to come up with solutions to the problems that they face, and removing the barriers and burdens that have been put in place by the state and the cronies that sponsor the politicians in power, so that they don't have as many burdens in the first place. I personally believe that when we get there, that people will naturally have a more proprietarian society, that most people won't want to collectivize. But I also recognize that out of 7.5 billion people on this planet, if we made the state go away and made all of the cronies and that whole system of kleptocracy go away and put the power back in the hands of the people, we're not all going to organize exactly the same way. And so when you ask me what is their place in the party, I believe that that libertarian socialists absolutely have a place in the party. And I'm glad that they have, a speaking point, a platform and a pedestal from which to speak in the party. I'm not a socialist, but the reason I have so much support among them is because A, I welcome them, and B, I recognize that once we remove the coercion, I'll be able to be a capitalist over here. They'll be able to be socialists over here. We won't be fighting each other or trying to impose on each other because neither one of us believes in coercion. And we may even be able to cooperate. And we may end up discovering a system that's even better than anything we're proposing right now. But we remove the coercion and find out when we get there. I will say this, in both the right side, because this is mirrored, on both the right side and on the left side, there are people, like on the right side, there are people that a lot of the stuff they say sounds kind of not libertarian. And there are people on the left side that occasionally they'll say stuff that's kind of not libertarian. But that's not anything unique to the left or right. There's just people, they're not 100% there yet, or they get upset about stuff they see on the left or things that they see on the right, and they kind of fall back into their old status ways and go, we need to stop them from doing that. But the best way we can stop that is to keep that dialogue open so that we can grow as libertarians and recognize that we don't necessarily have all the answers, but we do have one really good answer, is that people shouldn't be forced to do things, and they should be able to come up with their own voluntary solutions, and we'll figure it out when we get there.
Why do you think people and voters specifically who identify as such have decided to take refuge and kind of secure their place in the Libertarian Party as opposed to, say, the Green Party or a different, more progressive institution?
Well, I think because, again, so like, for example, so you're saying specifically libertarian socialists?
Yeah, I mean, specifically that caucus and people that kind of that mindset.
That's actually a good question. I think that, for one thing, we are a larger coalition. So if you recognize that already as libertarians in general, we are a small group and absolutely need to grow as a group, and need to be able to reach people across the political spectrum and bring them in, to further stratify ourselves and say, well, we're libertarian, but this party is majority capitalist, so we're going to join a more, even though it's not totally libertarian party, it's more left, it's more to the left, like we are, where the Green Party is, because the Green Party is not necessarily a libertarian socialist party. It is a socialist party that has some pretty heavy libertarian leanings, but it's not a strictly libertarian party like we are. But it's also a much smaller party. It doesn't have the ballot access we do, and it doesn't have the coalition building that we have. So both from a standpoint of us being more libertarian, so again, on that left, right, top, down, we're more down on the libertarian side than the than the Green is. And also we have more ballot access and we have a bigger platform, and we are easily the third largest party in the country. I think both from a strategic and a philosophical standpoint, most libertarian socialists are more at home here than they would be in the Green Party or in another left unity party.
I want to take a second to kind of pivot here a little bit to you personally, which I guess we were touching on in the beginning with your kind of your path to the vice presidential slot. Mm-hmm. You had a career in web design.
Yes,
that's been, from my understanding, aside from your activism, that's been kind of your primary career. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I actually retired from it 3 years ago so that I could focus full time. And I've taken on a couple of maybe like, I don't know, 3 or 4 projects since I, retired from my company. Some of it because the money was too good to say no to, and some of it just as favorite of friends or whatever. But I haven't been in business for actually 3.5 years now, almost.
Do you find that there's been anything in your career in web design or as a small businessman that's blended itself into your new career as a politician?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the leadership and communication skills that I learned in starting, because I started my company when I was 16. It was right before my 17th birthday in 1999. And I grew it into a pretty successful company. And my original goal was to become a billionaire in my late 40s, early 50s, and just grow, or if not a billionaire, a multi-millionaire. And I was fairly well on that trajectory. And then in 2014, the right side of my body went numb. And they told me this might be MS. And then 2 years later, and it takes that long often to get officially diagnosed. It can take a long time sometimes. 2 years later, they officially diagnosed me. And it wasn't the diagnosis that scared me. It was when they said that the goal of your treatment is to slow down your rate of progression so that it's not much different than your just general aging. And that was supposed to make me feel good. That hit me like a ton of bricks, because I realized even if I hadn't had this MS, even if I just was just like any other person, just slowly aging, you're just kind of slowly waiting until you're not here anymore. How much did money matter? How much did, having lots of houses or being able to have a private jet or whatever it was in my mind's eye, how much did that matter? How much more did it matter for me to do what actually mattered to me, and what was my actual goal in life, and what was my actual passion, and what would leave an actual impact and legacy years, maybe even decades or centuries after I'm gone? How could I help people? And my passion had always been sharing the message of liberty with people, but I was working full time with the business. So I was at a position where I didn't have to work anymore. And so I retired from web design and went full throttle into this. But what I learned from that, and thankfully, my MS has been stable for pretty much since it was diagnosed. I've actually gotten better slowly over time. But what I learned from that time in running that business, because I really only did the web design for the first few years, and then it grew to a point where I was essentially just focusing on selling projects and then outsourcing and so forth and collaborating with others. What I learned in that time was that the way you get someone over to your side, and in that case, it was trying to get them on my side that they should give me money for me to, make a web design or a marketing package or social media or whatever I was doing, is that you have to listen to people and you have to empathize with them, and you have to demonstrate that you heard what they said and that you understand what their concerns are. And then when you do that, when you have met them where they are, when you have asked them for, information and empathized with that situation and reflected back that you heard what they said, now you have them. There's a saying that I wish I had coined, but someone much smarter than me said it. I'm not sure who it was, that no one cares what you know if they don't know that you care. And so if we demonstrate that we care, and we reflect back that we heard them, and then we demonstrate a level of competence that we actually understand the problem, then we can take them on the journey. Then we can say, here's why back then, here's why you need web design. Here's why your website isn't working, or here's why your company isn't working without this website. And here's how I can help you by doing it. And now what I'm saying is, here's why healthcare costs so much. Here's why your student loans is so high. Here's why the cost of education is so high. Here's why your children have been put in special needs classes, even though they're not special needs. And, you don't know how you're going to be able to get education for your children. Here's why, your relatives who wanted to come here and start a better life are living in a camp on the border. Here's why your loved ones who signed up to defend and protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, is overseas right now fighting and killing and dying on behalf of incredibly powerful military contractors and central bankers and other billionaire cronies, as well as foreign dictators, and are then going to come home, if they do come home alive, are then going to have to, unfortunately, be given a second chance to die for their country by being subjected to the VA. Here is why things are this way. And here is how our solutions will fix that. And that's what I learned from my time. Meet people where they are, validate their concerns, because the vast majority of us, unless they're an absolute sociopath, the vast majority of us have legitimate concerns. Even if our idea that we've been told will fix it is a terrible idea, a harmful, terrible idea, the concern behind it, the reason we even supported such a thing in the first place, almost always is a legitimate, valid concern. Safety, protection, a future for my family, my health, my financial well-being, these are all legitimate concerns to have. You empathize with them, you reflect that you're paying attention, and then you take them on the journey for how we can solve these problems.
I wanted to talk to you specifically about your MS, actually, and that was the next point I actually really wanted to bring up.
Cool.
You are, to my knowledge, the first person running for this high of an office with that open diagnosis.
With an open diagnosis, yes. FDR had was ravaged by polio, and we didn't know, but yeah.
Yeah. Open diagnosis. And specifically of multiple sclerosis, which my mother has.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's very close to home for me. She's diagnosed early on in my life, and hers progressed somewhat more severely than yours, although certainly not as severely as her doctors at the time thought, something I'm very grateful for. But she's not able to live alone. I serve as her full-time caretaker.
Wow.
And it reminds me of something else that I was watching recently, which was I was revisiting The West Wing, which yes. You might remember, and you might remember that the president in that, Martin Sheen's character, also had an MS diagnosis.
Right.
The central plot line. One of the big questions that was brought up in that show, and one of the questions that I see in my own living situation is, what are the concerns related to your condition and the possibility of holding such a stressful and kind of
taxing, challenging job? Yeah.
That's
an excellent question.
Lack of term. How does that? Are there concerns about your physical fitness in the future? If let's say that Joe died and you wound up having to sit in the Oval Office, is that something that weighs on you?
Or even if something happened to Joe that I had to serve in her stead temporarily, it's a legitimate question, and I find that people have asked me privately because they're like, well, I don't want to offend. And I'm like, it's a legitimate question. I totally understand it. First, I'll talk about just the MS itself and how it has related to me. As I more than likely know, if you're the full-time caregiver, you probably know all the terms and all the different types of MS and everything else. I have a relapsing form of MS, and I'm on a treatment that has kept it completely in remission since I got on the treatment. Pretty much as soon as they diagnosed me, we went through the process of getting me on this treatment. I get my treatment every month, and I have been actually have not only just been in remission, but my symptoms have actually gotten better over time, because the damage that was already done prior to me getting on the treatment has slowly healed over time, which has allowed me to have fewer symptoms. And also another thing that I've done over and above that is I'm on a very strict autoimmune diet, and I'm also on a very strict wellness regimen. I lost close to 100 pounds. Actually, being diagnosed with MS, to my overall health has been one of the best things that ever happened. Not only from the stress reduction of getting out of a job that, even though it was incredibly financially rewarding, felt like a dead-end job. It was just about money. It was not fulfilling my passion for the legacy and the impact I wanted to be able to make for my loved ones and for the community and for the people that we share this planet with. It didn't serve that. And so that was a huge weight. I also started eating right for the first time really in my whole life. And I started actually exercising regularly, and I started meditating, and I take a bunch of different, supplements and things like that that are good for me and everything. So my overall health is about the best health that you can have for someone in my age, minus the fact that I have, MS. But my overall, like when they test me and stuff, it is my EDSS, the disability level, is 0. I don't have any. I have sensory symptoms and stuff like that, but nothing that's actually visible to anyone. No one can tell that I have it unless I tell them, because all of my symptoms are like, this finger feels funny, or, I will, after a long day, I will, my arms will feel a little bit like, will have like odd pins and needles sensations and stuff like that, but nothing that actually affects my ability to do my job. Or to do any job. So no, it's not a concern to me, because I have it well under control, and overall am healthier than most people my age because of my taking this head on and proactively. B, I have learned how to manage stress in order to be able to live a fulfilling life and not have this affect me. And C, we don't know what's going to happen, man. Like, I mean, it's one, another thing that really woke me up when I was diagnosed with this is, you don't know what's going to happen. Like it's, someone could we could elect someone who, by all accounts, is perfectly healthy, and then God forbid they're diagnosed with some terrible thing, some end state, not just something that's going to affect their overall, ability to operate, or their potentially could affect their livelihood. They're going to die soon. And there's no cure. Like, I mean, there are all sorts of things. They could get in a car accident. They could get hit, by the proverbial meteor or whatever. But the bottom line is that we don't know what the future is going to bring. What I can tell you is that when it comes specifically to my MS, it is well managed. I am handling it very well. And I have learned how to live a robust and at times challenging and taxing life with my MS. And I believe I'll be able to take that with me to the White House as well. Oh, and one more thing I want to say, and related to the MS. And I've never, I don't hide it, but I also don't run on it. I don't go, I'm Spike Cohen and I have MS and I'm speaking on behalf of millions of Americans. Like I'm not a token, and I cringe at the idea of trying to use myself as a prop. It's why I don't lean into the fact that I'm Jewish, and I don't, lean into the fact that I'm the first millennial on a presidential ticket. I don't lean into these things, not because I'm ashamed of them and I have no problem talking about them, but because I don't want to be seen as, hey, vote for me, I'm these different identity things that you can check off or whatever. I'm not doing oppression Olympics here, especially since I've lived a very charmed life and don't want to pretend that I'm some victim of anything or that I've been marginalized in any discernible way, because I have not. And there are people who have, and I think that that's an insult to them for me to try to pretend that I have. But I will say this. I have had many people who have spoken to me privately and said, the fact that you are dealing with a chronic illness and that you are not only living with it and managing it, but that you're taking on something like this and aren't ashamed to tell people that you have it is so empowering to me, because I'm out here working and I have I have MS, I have lupus, I have diabetes, I have one of a myriad of autoimmune issues, I have Crohn's disease, I have I'm a cancer survivor, and I still have a lot of neurological symptoms from the chemo. That's something that isn't talked a lot about. People who survived cancer but have ongoing symptoms because of the treatment. I've talked to people with all sorts of different chronic health things, fibromyalgia, people with very severe psychological things. They deal with very severe bipolar disorder, or they deal with depression. And, we call them the spoonies or whatever, but people that deal with this stuff, and a lot of them don't talk about it because they're afraid someone's going to say, and understandably so, not because of necessarily a prejudice, but someone's going to say, I don't know if I want to give, her that responsibility because, she's got that thing and she may not be able to do it. Or I don't want to put him in charge of that because, what if it affects his thing? And again, not even necessarily out of a prejudice or a misunderstanding, but out of a legitimate concern. So they hide it. And so saying that, having someone that is running like this and not, hey, I have MS, you better vote for me, or you hate disabled people or whatever. But saying, literally saying, I have this, it's a part of who I am. And we can talk about it if you want. If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. It's not anything I'm running on. And just as matter of fact as saying I'm a guy, or I'm white, or I have a beard, or, I wear glasses, or my haircut is terrible. Whatever, just saying it as, no, because I know it is. I know. And
None
so
of us have good haircuts right now.
none of us have good haircuts anymore. Like, let's
look at what I got going on over
Listen,
here.
I have male pattern baldness, and I'm trying my best to do a thing, and it's not working, and I understand. But so just as matter of fact as those are saying, yeah, and I have MS, I have had so many people tell me, like, this has empowered me more than you'll ever understand. And I'm still scared to tell people that I have it, but just the fact that there may come a day when I can say that and people aren't going to be immediately concerned or look down at me as a result. If I accomplish nothing else in this run, I am already grateful that I've been able to do that.
That was actually the next point I was going to try to get to, but I'm glad you went there naturally, though. There is a huge difference between, but it's a huge difference, yet a fine line between being kind of like you said, a token of a certain group.
Yes.
And being thrown on the ticket so that
as a result of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that we can campaign it to on said identity pattern versus being, a person who
just being it. Yeah.
Who does check a number of boxes that are underrepresented or are misunderstood. And when we're talking about many of the illnesses you just brought up, I think that's, but especially MS, it's something that is poorly misunderstood because it doesn't affect large numbers of people necessarily. It also, the advancements have come so quickly in the last 20 years that even people who maybe had a good understanding of it 2-3 decades ago
completely changed even 10, 15 years. Yeah.
It's important for people to see, I think, you and to see you in that light. I do believe that's important for a number of reasons. I also think that, you and I have, which we haven't really gotten into, and we might not have time to, unfortunately, some large policy differences in the way we would ascribe to handle different situations.
Well, we can get into it. Like I said, I got some extra time that I made, so we can get into a couple things. And
you'll be my second 2-part interview I've ever done. But one thing I think that is important is the fact that there's representation of someone who has a chronic illness and representation of someone who has your views and has a chronic illness as well. When you hear those types of narratives politically, they tend to be more, for lack of a better term, on my side of things. They tend to be more progressive in healthcare policy economically. We tend to, talk quite a bit about the need for single payer, and those are the narratives you hear. I don't think that, one, you see people with disabilities or with chronic illnesses running for high office openly enough. And two, I don't think that it's representative in these kind of libertarian values. You talked about the feeling of gratitude you get, though, from hearing those things, but does that also fill you with a certain level of responsibility?
It does, but it's one that I already had. So I recognized, I mean, when I was asked to run for VP and when I decided that I was going to do this, it was not without quite a bit of reconciliation and discussion with my wife and discussion with myself and some introspection here, because when I do something, I do it to win. And so I don't do something like, that should be fun. I do it with the logical end conclusion or the possible end conclusion of total victory in mind. So not just what if I actually get the nomination, but what if I actually get elected? Because that is what I am running to do, not just to get the nomination, but to get elected. And so I had those talks with myself. Can you manage this? Will you be able to do the amount of travel you'll need to do? Will you be able to do these things? And what will that look like? And so I had to do that, and I had to have the discussions with my wife. This is what it's going to look like. This is, my wife is an incredibly beautiful woman, and incredibly thoughtful, and incredibly brilliant and loving, and she looks like someone that should be stuck up, and she's the opposite of that. And so she is beloved to the point where people like her more than me, and she is very, very popular now. She's become like the Jackie Onassis of the Libertarian Party, and the more people see her, the more they want to know about her. And I prepared her for that. I'm like, how you are, how people are when they meet you. You're about to have potentially millions of people want to find out more about you. And so we had those kinds of discussions. So yes, I feel a sense of responsibility, but that was already there. That was already there. And I hoped that I would then also be able to see people that understood and appreciated what it was I was doing, not as a rote kind of, again, tokenism, but as just a matter of fact thing. Yes, I have this, and I'm not going to let it get in the way of me living my life to its fullest and pursuing a passion for others and for benefiting all of us in a way that I myself cannot do without the help of others. That I'm going to that I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this on, not because I have this, and not even despite the fact that I have this, but simply I have this and I'm doing this.
You mentioned your wife, so now I've got to ask, how'd you guys meet? How long have you been together? Give us the gross celebrity gossip details.
So I love to tell my version of this story, which is entirely true. We met online, that's true. We met online, and she got one look at me and instantly fell in love. And she came down, and
for the record, sorry to interrupt you, I firmly believe this is no longer true based on that statement.
You could sense the moment that it became spin. No, okay, so we met online and had some really great conversations. She's from Toronto. She's from the Toronto area of California, of Canada, and I am from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And so we talked quite a few times, and she happened to have vacation time, so she came down. And we got to spend some of the holidays together, pretty much most of December together, and we really just hit it. We fell in love, and honestly, I fell in love before I even met her, and I like the things she did too. But so we fell in love and spent quite a bit of time together, and then she moved down here in 2009, and we got married in 2010, and we have been together for just over 10. This past March, it was 10 years we've been married, and almost 13 years that we've been together. And so we actually have a few different anniversaries. The one that we first met online, the one we first met in person, our engagement, and then our wedding. And if you know anything about my wife, we definitely celebrate all of them.
I was about to ask, do you actually observe all four?
Oh yeah, no, we observe them. We are very observant. I am Jewish. I come from a observing many holidays household, and so we have added that to our panoply of things that we celebrate on a regular basis.
Do you find that that faith has been important to you, or that it influences your politics at all?
I would say to an extent that if you look at Tanakh, which is basically the Old Testament plus a few others, but if you look at Scripture, and my wife is Christian, so looking at even just the whole Bible, in my mind when I read it, what I see is a series of. It starts with a story about how God gave the Jewish people basically a system whereby the rabbis determined religious answers to how things should be done. Outside of that, people could largely operate it as they wish, as long as they were keeping within the idea of respecting others. And I'm not going to say it was a libertarian society, but it was not an authoritarian society, I guess I should say. Outside of the religious questions of things like diet and lifestyle and so forth, for the most part, and even those things were like, do whatever you want, but you're going to suffer long term as a result of it, and especially once you die. And the people said, we want a king. We want to be ruled over like the other countries have. The other nations have kings, and they have great prestige, and the kings get to live these great lives, and they march around on their horses, and everyone clamors to them, and we want that too. And God said, that's not going to be good. You're not going to have a good time. You're going to wish you hadn't done this. You should definitely rethink this. I've given you the rabbis. I've given you the council. You can then live your life as you see fit. And they said, no. We want a king, and we want to rule. We want someone to rule us, and we want that all of the splendor that comes with that. And then he said, here are all the things that are going to happen. You are going to be at war with others around you. You are going to have money taken from you. You are going to be told what to do. All of these bad things are going to happen. He listed out. He said, and if that's what you want, so be it. And then the entire rest of what you would call the Old Testament, the entire rest of Tanakh is just a series of stories about how having this king screwed everything up. Insisting on being ruled over led to a series of unfortunate events that led to the Jewish people eventually their kingdom and their nation being disbanded in their own land. And then looking at reading New Testament, So many of the stories that come from Christ have to do with, the Pharisees and the Sadducees made these man-made laws around God's law, and basically were the puppets of Herod, who himself was a puppet of the Roman occupation. And Jesus comes down and basically says that's all. That's not of our kingdom. Obviously, was very careful in how he said it, because he wanted to wait until it was his moment to be executed, and you couldn't just flat out say we need to rebel against this. But pretty much everything he said was that this is completely illegitimate. He literally even said, when they asked him, "Do you think you should pay taxes?" He said, "Someone hand me a coin, or someone show me a coin," because he didn't carry money. They show him because money was unclean, which in and of itself was a political statement. And so they're holding the money up, and he goes, "Whose face is on that?" They say, "It's Caesar's." And he says, "Give it to Caesar then." And he wasn't talking about taxes. He was saying, give the entire system to Caesar. Go sell everything you own, give it to the poor, and go follow me. This is a largely anarchist statement. We reject everything. If you say that in order to participate in your system, we have to listen to your laws, then we just don't participate in your system. And so that is my takeaway from that, from a political standpoint. And I think a belief system is so much more than, what we think politically about how humans should interact with each other. It's exponentially more than that. It's infinitely more than that. But to the extent of how it guides my belief system, yeah, we see a series of laws, a series of stories about how demanding that human beings rule over us makes things worse. That kind of lines up with what we believe.
Yeah, it's kind of an anarcho-syndicalist kind of narrative. So how does that jive with your kind of anarchist capitalist politics?
Again, once you remove the coercion, people can voluntarily organize however they wish. Anarcho-syndicalism, mutualism, anarcho-socialism or communism, whatever. These things are, I am a believer in bottom unity. Even within a really radical minarchist state where you have a very minimal government whose only purpose is to protect the lives and the rights and the properties of the people within it, and to, I guess, arbitrate between common disputes between people and so forth, and which is largely funded by voluntary fees for the various services they provide. Even within that, you could have a wide bourse of different ways that people choose to interact with each other. The problem is not how people choose to live their lives or to interact with each other. The problem is when people try to impose it on others. The difference between libertarianism and authoritarianism is the difference between capitalists living in a system here and socialists living in a system here, and capitalists and socialists engaging in a nuclear Cold War for decades over whose system gets to win, because now it's coercion. It's not you do your thing over here, I do my thing over here. It's I'm going to impose my system on you. No, I'm going to impose my system on you. Oh yeah? Well, I have nukes. Oh yeah? Well, I have nukes too. And it's because instead of it being I'm going to do me, you do you, it's I'm going to make you live my life the way that I think you should live your life. I'm going to make you live the way that I think you should, and I will use whatever level of force is required to bring you into compliance. So the problem isn't the left versus right. The problem is the up versus down, the authoritarianism versus the libertarianism.
You're touching on almost maybe two things though, right? They're connected but separate. Which is one is what we think of as domestic policy,
right?
The implementation of laws within our own borders. And how that guides our ability to interact with each other.
Right.
The other is geopolitics, our interactions with other nations. We to some degree have a representative democracy that we to some degree at least are choosing how our nation conducts itself and the types of laws and system that we choose to live in. Other countries may not have that.
Right.
Do you see a place in the world for the United States that it is trying to protect those rights of self-determination for other peoples?
Are you seeing is there another libertarian society that's happening somewhere else?
No, I'm asking if you and Joe were elected.
Yes.
Obviously, by just nature of being libertarians, you have a tendency to probably, I would say, be more insular, to want to scale back foreign military adventurism, and yet
Non-interventionist. We'd have relationships with other countries and the people in them, but it would be in the form of trade and diplomacy, as opposed to, top down, do what we say, we're going to occupy your country, and do what we say, or else it's going to be ugly for you.
Yet when we see grave humanitarian disasters, and we see authoritarian governments that are wholesale slaughtering their own people,
right?
The world has come to rely on coalitions, but often American-led coalitions, to stop those types of crimes against humanity. What would your administration, how would you approach those?
Well, if you look at the countries that have been doing this, almost always it's led by a tin pot dictator that either is or was sponsored by the U.S. government and our, as you put it, our coalition. So you look at Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was not there because the Iraqi people wanted him. He wasn't there because the Iraqi people tolerated him. He was there because a much larger power, the United States government, imposed him on the Iraqi people, and as a I guess like a bulwark against the largely Soviet-sponsored Iranian government. And going forward from that, the reason that we had a problem with the largely Soviet-sponsored Iranian government was because we used to have relations with their Shah, or I should say that it's not we, the U.S. government had relations with their Shah, largely for geopolitical purposes, and also for oil and other purposes like that. And then when the people decided to depose the Shah because he was a terrible leader and replace him with a democratically elected leader, the Eisenhower administration in the 1953 staged a military coup against him, reimposed the Shah, who came back more brutal than ever, and within a couple of decades led to the Iranian Revolution, which led to the mullahs, who themselves came in because they were the only people who had the wherewithal to fight against the U.S. occupation. This would not have been, all other things being equal, what the Iranian people would have wanted. Now the Iranian people are being oppressed by that system in a similar way that what happened in Cuba. The U.S. government sponsored Batista, which led to the revolution with people like Che Guevara and Castro and Fidel Castro. And Fidel Castro, in and of himself, he had some left leanings, but he wasn't necessarily a hardcore communist, certainly not a Soviet communist. But the U.S. government wanted Batista back, so they staged the Bay of Pigs. When that failed, he became a Soviet protectorate because he needed protection against the U.S. government. So I think that, and with all due respect, I think that it is a slightly simplistic take on things, or at least it doesn't look at root causes to say that there are bad people doing bad things, and the U.S.-led coalitions are the best way to deal with that. I think if that were the case, they wouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
And
I mean, let's be honest, that question on my behalf is very much a white guy playing devil's advocate, because that's
fair enough. Yeah,
that's our favorite pastime.
Yeah. So I will say, the U.S. pulling out of imposing itself on the world will even immediately be a net positive, and in the long term be an overwhelming net positive. And when people say, yeah, but what about the X group? What about the Kurds in Syria? What about, and if I had been, advocating for this in the 1970s, what about the Montagnards in Vietnam? Or what about the Kurds in Iraq? What about, people who are basically they're the little guy that's fighting on our behalf, apparently not having seen what our history is of dealing with small little guys who fight on our behalf. What do we do about them? And the short answer is, I would say we should allow them to come here if they wish to. And we should be far more open to refugees of all stripes, because many of us are the descendants of refugees back when the term refugee was even really a thing. I myself, on my father's side, am the descendant of people who worked their way to North America, originally through Canada and then eventually to here, to get away from the pogroms in Russia. And if our current systems were in place, there's a good possibility that they would not have made it and possibly would have died in Russia. So I think that long before we say that we should impose ourselves on the rest of the world, instead I say that we should stop the harm that's being done by not imposing our government and our military on the rest of the world and leading to those types of bad things. And when there are bad things that happen, us and our allies should welcome in the people that are being harmed. And we should also, as individuals and organizations and coalitions, engage in boycotts, not embargoes, but boycotts, people choosing to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to buy your stuff as long as your government or you are facilitating the treatment of people that way. That is a far more effective way to deal with people, and trading with those people so that they can grow financially in their own communities. These are the things that actually fix these problems. Does it mean there will never be another mass harm being done by government? Of course not. And anyone who tries to tell you that is selling you a utopian lie. What it means is that there will be less of the conditions that lead to that happening in the first place, and more of the conditions that lead to the ameliorating or the elimination of that happening.
Well, it's always seemed to me there's a fundamental disconnect that's gone on for 80 plus years in this country where we want to say, stop killing those people, and yet we don't want to actually take in and help those people. We're fine. We're like the drunk guy in a bar who sees a bully and then without asking two questions goes and punches that bully in the face, not realizing that he's causing far more destruction in the process.
Right. Because his punch isn't a punch. What he does is he rams his car into the guy and also 6 other people that are around him and goes, yeah, there, I fixed it. We brought you freedom. Yeah.
He punches the guy, but in doing so, he punches them directly into the person he said he was trying to protect and knocks both of them unconscious. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
There's absolutely a sense of, I think, lunacy to it. I think, you look at American foreign policy for the last century, there are, I think, inspiring successes. There are far more horrific failures that we have to learn to grapple with as a people, and I think we have to get better about admitting and maybe apologizing for.
American foreign and domestic policy, U.S. government foreign and domestic policy has been crafted for over 160 years by Republicans and Democrats in their exclusive control of every lever of power of government, from the federal, state, and local levels, with the occasional exception of some independent mayor or third party governor or whatever. But overwhelmingly, and at the federal level, almost entirely. I mean, Justin Amash is the first Libertarian congressman. And he just joined this year. So, I mean, this is overwhelming, virtually exclusive control of government in any real way, exclusive control of the actual levers of power in government at all levels. And what have they done with it? They have used it to take our power, to take our wealth, to take our freedom, and not immediately, not in some, story book where they come in and take it all at once, but in an insidious, step-by-step, systemic and ordered way to take and take and take and take from us, to the benefit of themselves and of incredibly powerful, well-heeled, politically connected billionaires and multimillionaires who have bought and paid for them to be in those offices in the first place, and handed them the legislation and the regulations that they want in order to be able to create a system using a narrative of, we're doing this on your behalf because you could never possibly do this yourself. But what they're really doing is they are taking power from us and making us more and more reliant on them, and then stepping in and giving us crumbs from the bread that they've taken from us, and using some of the money they've taken out of our wallet and buying a crutch for it. Said, here's that crutch you need. And then they go to us and say, if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't have that crutch and you wouldn't have those breadcrumbs. No, if it wasn't for you, I'd have my loaf of bread. I wouldn't be hobbled. And so when we look at things like the war on drugs, occupational licensing laws, systemic racism, police brutality, qualified immunity, the school to prison pipeline, the police and prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex, the wars overseas, all of this feeds into a system where, and I call it a kleptocracy, where we are robbed at every single level in order to finance this continued, gradual, insidious, deceitful, cynical takeover of every aspect of our lives by a relative handful of incredibly powerful and wealthy people, for no other reason than to preserve their power and influence. All the narratives that we are sold, everything we are told about why government does what it does, why we need to vote for this thing or vote for this official or this party or whatever else, all of it lends back into the idea that there is just a small handful of incredibly powerful people who control every lever of power. And all narratives that we have, from corporate media and from entertainment and pop culture, all the way up to the politicians themselves, all of it is a finely crafted narrative that is built around us deciding that this gilded cage that they have put us in is okay, and that this far less gilded cage that marginalized people are in is also okay because our cage is pretty nice. And if they don't like it, tough on them because we don't really care about them. This is all a narrative of victimization, and it is a systemic problem. And what libertarians propose is to dismantle these systems, not to reform them, not to rename them or relabel them into things that sound good from our perspective, but to dismantle them and to put the power back in the hands of the people. And I know that that's a simplification of things, but if we talk about every single thing, healthcare, education, immigration, student loan debt, the police, the war on drugs, any of these subjects, it all boils down to the same thing. The people in power have intentionally made things worse. They haven't intentionally made your life worse to varying degrees. And if you're in a member of a marginalized community, I don't even have to be telling you this. They have made your life worse. And the only way that it will end is for us to take that power back from them. And that is what Joe and I are running on.
What are some other kind of concrete policies that you guys are advocating, though?
I mean, there's on which subject? Because we're.
I was trying to figure out how to do that in a broad way that would also be a little narrow. Because here's the issue: I've kept you for so much longer than I told you I was going to keep you. Because it's Saturday during a pandemic and I'm very lonely.
Right. Yeah. It's just the time to talk. Yeah. So, I mean, it does sound like we may need to reschedule to do just a policy only one. But the short answer is when it comes to healthcare, for example, we recognize that the cronies have created a system that has been sponsored by government. It is neither a free market system, nor is it a fair or universal system. It is a system whereby we are paying something like 3 times more than the average member of a developed country is paying for healthcare. And it is a government system. And here's how we know that. The US government is paying more more in taxpayer dollars per patient than all but like a small, like 5 or 6 other countries. And so it is a government system. But it's a government system that is specifically designed to the benefit of incredibly powerful cronies who created the system. And so we see things like patent protections for drugs that have been around longer than most of us have been alive that allowed them to jack up the price 100,000, 10,000 times more than they were charged in any other country because of that patent protection. It's not a free market system. It's certainly not a free market capitalist system. It is a system whereby the government has said this company and this company and this company are allowed to make epinephrine, something that costs pennies to make. Only these companies can make it because they have the patent protection. And then those companies, because there isn't a broad competition, they go, yeah, we'll make it over here and you make it over there and you make it over there, and we definitely will not compete with each other. And because because there's no price equilibrium in healthcare, because the government underwrites the costs through Medicare and Medicaid and government mandated insurance, the pharmaceutical companies can charge whatever they want because they know the government will pay for it or underwrite the paying for it. So prices continue to skyrocket through the roof, which means if you're not covered, you just die if you need that stuff. So our proposal is to take that 75 or 80 or even 85% of the cost of healthcare that is related to government protections and red tape bureaucracy, which is why when you walk into a hospital or a medical center or a doctor's office, you'll see a doctor, 1 or 2 nurses, and like 15 administrators. Because the cost of healthcare, so much of the cost of healthcare is just compliance with various diktat, various regulatory burdens, various taxes and mandates, various regulations at the state and federal level that don't increase public health or public safety. They just create pencil pushing jobs, and they do so at the expense of your ability to afford healthcare. Then you look at the problems with the price equilibrium that's completely off because the government's underwriting it. You take all of that out of it, you put the power back in the hands of doctors and patients, and now healthcare costs go down. And they go down in a sustainable way. They don't go down because the government's spending endless trillions of dollars to pay for it through a single payer system, which leads to massive cost overruns or rationing of care. Again, this is the same government that decided whether you were essential or non-essential. They're still deciding that. This is the same government that decided that cronies should make billions while you die because you can't get your EpiPen in time. Now they're going to decide whether you get care or not. Instead of doing that, we do it in a sustainable way by putting the power back in the hands of the people, taking the power out of the hands of the cronies and the craven pandering politicians and the bureaucrat class that they've created, and putting it back in the hands of patients and providers. These doctors that are having to join Kaiser Permanente and Athena Health and all these massive organizations, not because they want to be a cog in a machine, but because they themselves can't afford the cost of all these compliances, all of this regulatory compliance. You know who can't afford it? All those big companies who wrote the policies. Gee, I wonder why they would write policies that make all of their smaller competitors either go out of business or join them. How weird that it would end that way. We get them out of it, put the money back in your hands, put the power back in your hands, put the decision-making ability back in your hands and the hand of the provider. And that makes healthcare costs go down in a sustainable, market-driven way. And that's how we would apply to everything. I mean, we talk about education, we talk about gun control, immigration. All of these things are I guess the moral tale, if you had to distill it down to one, is powerful people have made this problem, and they've done so to their benefit. And the answer is to take it out of their hands and put it back in the hands of ourselves and our loved ones in our communities. So I'd love to come back on to talk specific policy on all these subjects, but that's sort of the I guess the 30,000 foot view of what our policy is applied to anything.
It's incredibly difficult because I immediately wanted to kind of push back on some of your healthcare, but here's the problem, and maybe we'll leave it at this for today.
Sure.
I am endlessly fascinated by who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give that time to get through in the beginning, because I think that you are an interesting, and I'm not trying to put too much smoke up your ass because I'm not voting for you.
Hey, you're being honest.
But I find you to be a very charismatic and interesting person. And I find you to be a better spokesman for some of your views than some of your predecessors. The flip side of that, though, is while wanting to let that show in the first part of this, we don't actually get to talk about those views.
Right.
And that's more on my end for being a terrible interviewer. I don't know why you agreed. I don't know. You
promoted me for an hour plus. So no, but listen,
you know what the problem is? You need to talk to Brian and be like, why the hell did you schedule me to do that interview?
Well, and when I ask him that, I'm going to say, now, when can we schedule the second one where I come back on and we actually hash it out over policy? This is the stuff I covet. I like talking to people who have a completely different view than me, because I don't think I'm the smartest person on earth who already knows everything. And I certainly love hearing what people have to say about things. And B, I believe that a lot of times when people believe that maybe a centralized authority needs more power, that, we can hash that out and figure out maybe you don't think that quite as much as you thought you did. Or maybe even if we don't agree on how the end goal would look, that a solution that is based on what people's individual needs are and what their community's needs are is the best one possible. And I think you'll also find that on a lot of subjects, we agree almost completely eye to eye. I bet when it comes to things like police accountability and the war on drugs, we probably agree almost entirely.
Oh, well, if we're being candid, I mean, we're going to agree more than we're going to disagree.
Yeah.
We're gonna disagree on some economic issues. We're gonna agree on most social ones.
Okay.
But yeah, let's do 20 minutes in the future.
Yeah, let's definitely do. We'll do a Alex and Spike, and we'll call it "Sorry for Arguing," and we'll have an episode that's just us hashing it out on that stuff, because that's what I mean. I crave that stuff. I love. When I go to a Black Lives Matter protest and talk to them about the things that we agree on, I look forward to when they say, yeah, but what about healthcare? What about gun control? What about whatever? Because A, sometimes I find we actually already agree on that too. And B, if we don't, it's a great starting point to talk about how we apply the same thought process that got us to police accountability and ending the war on drugs, and also applying it to other things as well. But I definitely would love to come back on and talk about that. All
right, let's pick a day to yell at each other. Spike, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sitting with me for an hour and 20 minutes.
Absolutely.
That's unbelievable. Absolutely. And I will do my best to try to get someone else to sit through the full hour and 20 minutes and listen to it and hear you out.
That sounds good. And if anyone who sat through this hour and 20 minutes liked what they heard, I invite you to join us at Joe20. That's JO20.com. If you're able to make a contribution, we'd greatly appreciate it. More importantly, if you're able to join our team and join our grassroots army for human liberty, fighting to set the world free in our time, we have a volunteer form you can fill out. We'd love to have you join our team. And I look forward to hearing from you. And I appreciate your time, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on, Spike. That was Sorry for Rambling. That was Spike Cohen, 2020 Libertarian Vice Presidential nominee. And we'll see you next time.